Welcome to Quality Matters, where we speak with experts across industries to see how their perspectives can inform our pursuit of high-quality education for all students. I'm Shaka, and this is Caitlin, and we're happy to be your guides for this limited series.
Like you, Shaka and I are passionate about all students having access to a great education, and quality is a driving force behind our work. But what does quality really mean? In an era where parents can customize their child's education, this question is more important than ever.
During each session, we'll hear from leaders in education, technology, business, sports, and the arts. We hope to apply their insights to our pursuit of a great education in the K-12 space.
Join us on this journey to secure a great education for all children. This is Quality Matters.
Well, today we are excited to welcome Dr. Ashley Berner to the show. Ashley is the director of the Johns Hopkins Institute for Education and Policy and associate professor of education. She's a parent, a former teacher, and recently published a book, Educational Pluralism and Democracy. Ashley, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Well, I've got to say that I read your book. And certainly I encourage other folks to go out and get their own copy. But I read it appropriately enough when I was headed to a reception honoring Jeffrey Canada, the founder of the Harlem Children's Zone, another person who is just super passionate about education, about delivering high quality education and seeing great outcomes for all students. So it was really appropriate reading, kind of got me in the zone for that trip. So I really appreciate it. And just want to congratulate you on publishing the book.
Well, thanks. It was, it's a joy to see it out there, and I'm flattered that you read it. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that you discuss, it's really the central theme of the book, is kind of this two-pronged solution. Now, this might be new to a lot of listeners. So can you briefly explain the two parts and why you think these are the levers that will lead to higher quality K-12 education in the U.S.?
Sure. So when we at our institute work with systems across the country, and I do quite a lot of work internationally, we talk to leaders, educational leaders from around the world. And I become convinced that there are two levers that can be pulled, should be pulled simultaneously, that any school leader can pull to good effect for kids. And those two levers are a strong school culture in which the mission is clear, distinct, there's alignment and community around it. So a strong school mission, and then a strong liberal arts curriculum, or put differently, a knowledge building curriculum. And I spend a lot of time in the book talking about both of those, particularly the curriculum. And what's, I think, so remarkable and challenging for an American audience is that most countries in the world design their school systems with these in mind from the ground up. So we talk a lot in our country about choice versus zoned residence. So the school choice movement. And we fight about that. We fight a lot about the quality measures, whether there should be quality control measures. Some people think not. Some people think it should be look this way. So we fight a lot about those two things. But really strong school systems have choice and accountability by design. Educational pluralism. And I'll just say a really quick definition. Educational pluralism is just a different way to structure education in which the government funds a lot of school types equally: Montessori, Catholic, Jewish, secular, socialist. And that's the strong school mission part. And also hold all those schools accountable for academic outcomes. And they do that in some very interesting and effective ways. So I just spend a lot of time talking about that, what we can learn from other cultures and countries.
Yeah,
I think that's really interesting. This idea of learning from others, that's definitely something I think everybody could do or focus on a little bit more. And from your perspective, and you sort of touched on this in your book, some of the implications of educational pluralism through or on policy, on communities, on families.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share with us a little bit more in that space
Sure.
and from your perspective and from all of the research that you've
Yeah.
acquired and all of the knowledge you've acquired?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, these are so the really interesting thing about a pluralistic country like the Netherlands or Canada, most provinces of Canada or Sweden even, or Australia, is that there's an underlying assumption. There are two underlying assumptions that work together and sometimes in tension. The first is that schooling can't be neutral with respect to values, that you can't choose a curriculum or hire teachers or recruit families, even choosing your classroom protocols and disciplinary code. That has values. It's values laden. And we're teaching kids something all the time. Even our silences teach kids something.
Mm-hmm.
So the first principle is you can't have a neutral school. So you should fund a lot of them, different kinds, that reflect different values and beliefs about the good, the true, and the beautiful. Now, so far, so good as far as the parent right movement, right? Parents have the right. And the international human rights documents actually talk a lot about cultural minorities and parents having the inherent right to educate their kids according to their values and beliefs. So there's that piece. And at the same time, and I think we forget this at our peril, the understanding that education is also a common endeavor. It's not just an individual good. It's we tax people for other kids' children. And so the supposition on that side is it matters to me that your child knows how to read. It matters to you that my child knows the branches of government. And so it's imperative to have a public assurance of quality. And that's the rationale for accountability. And so, of course, these two can be in tension, but what I think these great school systems accept those both premises, and they will have, like the Netherlands, my favorite example, 36 different kinds of schools are funded equally. And all of those schools have to teach some common content. And sometimes that looks like you may send your child to an Islamic school, but your children have to learn what Hindus believe, what Christians believe, what Judaism teaches, what Marx believes. So they are able to separate the distinctive mission and the lens of a school from the content of education.
Mm-hmm.
They don't confuse exposure and indoctrination.
Mm-hmm. Ashley, do you think about, particularly as you have studied systems around the globe, how do you say a great school system, and we talk about a great education for kids, but we use that adjective
Mm-hmm.
great really easily, right? Almost too easily. What to
Yes.
you, can you maybe drill down a little bit more and put some meat on the bones? What outcomes, maybe it's outcomes, are you interested in that indicate that a system is great? How do you personally evaluate that?
I would say, it's kind of a commonplace phrase, but excellence and equity. So when you look at any school system, families that are well resourced are going to have their kids be better educated. You can't change that fact that well-resourced families are going to get their kids supplemental education, move to a quote good suburb, or put their child in a private school. The question is, does the school system enable all families to enroll their children in a school that erases the achievement gap? And it's really, really important. So are our schools, number one, helping kids become whatever they want to become, and doing so in a way that equalizes the playing field? So let me just give some concrete examples that are, first of all, from our country. So most of us are familiar with the James Coleman report. James Coleman was a sociologist who wrote the original Excellence in Equity report for the federal government in 1966. He was the first person to really study the outcomes of American education. It was an extensive study, 800,000 participants across the country, academic tests, and so forth. And his striking conclusion was that in the aggregate, American education does not change the trajectory for kids, that family background trumps everything else, and that American school systems don't change that. So a child from a low-income family goes to school, ends up being a low-wage earner, and so forth. So we still talk about the Coleman report. We still talk about the family background swamping other effects. But here's the interesting thing. In the data, Coleman noticed some anomalies. He noticed some schools that were changing the trajectory for kids. So he spent another 15 years studying American high schools and produced a book in which he concluded that Catholic high schools erased the achievement gaps between wealthy and poor kids in 4 years. And it's actually a stunning book. I cry when I read it. I've read it a couple of times because he essentially says the Catholic high schools of the 1970s are the common school that we've all hoped for. And so that excellence of the capacity of a school system to provide such a high caliber education that elevates all the kids to a very high level.
I'm curious because we know quality is subjective. We know everybody's definition of what constitutes high quality is going to look different. If everybody can agree on a strong school culture and a knowledge building curriculum as being two important inputs, does it matter? Or maybe the better question is, to what extent does it matter if everybody's opinions on those two things is as different as their opinions on quality?
That's a really interesting way to put it. Does it matter? I mean, I would say a couple of things. First of all, this structure that I'm proposing and that's actually enacted in a lot of systems has a lot of flexibility in it. There's a lot of room in the joints. So, for example, in the Netherlands, the assessments are content rich, but they're also a both and. So students' tests and what allows them to go to the next level are both the national test and also their school's test. It's a combination of both. There's an absolute quality. You really have to demonstrate that you know certain algebraic functions, but there's also the flexibility around the lens through which information is imparted and also some of the content. And I think that's really important to hold in place. The other piece that I think is so interesting is if you give kids a knowledge building curriculum such that they know how to, they really understand how to read by third grade. There's the science of reading. There's great literature, great math, science, philosophy, religion, the liberal arts curriculum that kids learn systematically. Then by the time they're in 8th or 9th grade, they can make decisions about the next upper secondary school and their lifelong trajectory from a position of knowledge. So in many countries like Germany, Switzerland, Finland, by the time kids are in 9th grade, because they've had this great baseline, then by 9th grade, they can differentiate. They can say, hey, I love academics. I want to go on to the university. So they go to a gymnasium in Germany where it's very academic. By the way, only about 30% of the kids take that course. Kids might say, I want to become an electrical engineer. I'm going to go get vocational training that's tied to my industry. And they head down that path to a great job. So when you really spend the first 8 to 9 years of formal education presenting consistent knowledge building curriculum where you really have to know the state capitals, for example, whatever, then you can allow, the kids are well positioned to make meaningful choices about their futures that look very different. But the point is, you're not foreclosing those options on the front end.
Mm-hmm.
What is really bad is when we give high school diplomas to young people who cannot take credit-bearing courses in a community college because they can't perform, they can't read, and they can't do math. So if I were to pick one outcome that really, really matters, it's a low bar, but I would say, are kids able to take credit-bearing courses in community college? Again, that's a low bar, but if you can't do that, something's wrong with the educational system.
Yeah. It makes me think real quick about the difference between, you talk about these disaggregated skills, and sometimes we can get so fixated on the skills that we forget what the goal is, right?
Totally.
And the image that came to mind, and bear with me here, but my stepfather, he used to do high jump in high school, and this is around the time when high jump went from running up and jumping and sort of like kicking your legs over and trying to get over the bar to the Fosbury flop, right? Where you then Dick Fosbury would run up, kind of do a half turn and go over backwards.
Interesting.
Now, at the time, they would have said, well, you're doing it all wrong, right? We've been practicing how to kick your legs up in this, goofy looking way. I mean, it's basically like Rockettes, but over a bar.
It's interesting. I didn't know this.
Yeah, but Fosbury sort of said, no, the whole point is to see if you can jump over a bar that's super high. I can do it much higher if I turn and get over, right? And that was the sort of point. And guess what? The bar was raised. Yeah. And I think about it in how we disaggregate skills. Sometimes we're talking about these skills that kids aren't interested in, that have very little practical import. And then, we miss that there might be a better way to do it holistically.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I agree 100%. And to your point about the goal, in math and science, skills and knowledge content are very much more aligned. You can demonstrate that you understand conceptual math by doing the fractions and so forth. But in English language arts and social studies, the skill of, say, find the main idea is far too facile for the knowledge building that you need to have to even understand a play or to understand a novel. You have to understand enough about the context in which it's set. And so the really interesting thing, and this is definitely emerging more and more in the research, is that if you have greater content knowledge, you will do better on the skills-based tests. They're not, and so teachers who are drilling on compare and contrast and all of these things, but not having those rich conversations about things that matter, are not going to help their kids succeed on the skills-based tests.
So much of what you're saying resonates deeply with how we were, on one hand, prepared and equipped to lead our classrooms. I taught young kindergartners, and a lot of what you're saying was encouraged. On the other hand, and Shaka, this is where your visual image, I totally got exactly how that connected to you, because Ashley, on the other hand of what you're saying, like a lot of this is almost feeling like it's reinventing how people should be doing, approaching their instruction and approaching their teaching. I'm curious, from your personal experience, what was the turning point that set you on this journey, that sparked your pilot light to start pursuing this research, this avenue, based off of all of your experience? Where did it turn?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, I say personally, the real horror of our school systems emerged when I was teaching at my first teaching job was of little tiny kids. And that was the hardest job I've ever had, because every second has to be accounted for. But I actually was trained in history. So my master's and doctorate are in history, not education. And my first job after my master's degree was was actually teaching in a large public university in Louisiana. And I was teaching 200 kids at a time, American history and European history. And I realized within 2 days that the children, the kids, the young people in front of me had zero background knowledge on anything I was talking about.
Okay.
They had never had anything with philosophy. They'd never had any great literature. They thought Athens was a city in Georgia. Rome, the ancient cultures, none of it. And yet, when I gave them real meat and invited them into the conversation, they loved it. And I was so upset that these very capable young people had been under-challenged. And that's what really got me to study the history of our pedagogical experience. And Diane Ravitch, with whom I agree about virtually nothing, is a fantastic historian of this. She wrote a book called Left Back that showed how Americans had thrown away the liberal arts curriculum. It's a huge book. It's fantastic, but it was deliberate and intentional. And so that was what kind of started me on this quest. And then having the chance to work with so many school systems around our country now at the Institute with, to try to change that around. And the good news is there are school systems right now that are taking this work very seriously.
Really quickly, you said something that I think will be pivotal in our conversations, both in this discussion together and also in future ones. You discussed this idea of students being under-challenged. So we talk about quality in outcomes. We talk about quality of input. Something we have not wrapped our conversations around yet, or even really our minds, is this idea of the quality of expectations we give to students. If we have a low quality of expectation for students, if our expectations of what they can do and how they can perform is low, they meet that. When the quality of expectations is robust and it's all encompassing and it is large, the likelihood of them achieving that is greater. And to your point, and what your book does a really nice job of articulating is what are the building blocks needed for students to reach that, to get up there to that high quality, and what does it look like to have people encourage them into those high quality expectations. So this idea of under challenging, you experienced it firsthand. I think if everybody considered that a little bit, they, I'm sure, could think of situations where they themselves have been under challenged, under expected. And so I love the introduction that you just contributed to this notion of quality in our expectations and in our thinking.
TNTP's report that came out in 2018 called The Opportunity Myth really nailed this, where they visited thousands of classrooms and saw that particularly low-income kids had less than a 50% chance of being given on-grade level material. Now, on-grade level material is a low bar as far as I'm concerned. It's far too low. But we are systematically under-challenging our kids. And I think it's complicated because our teachers were themselves under-challenged in school. This has been going on for a very, very long time. And so the systems that we work with at the Institute that are really trying to turn things around spend a lot of time on high-quality instructional materials and a lot of time on curriculum-aligned professional development because a lot of teachers never had the content. And this is one of the things that we can hope for in the future, that we can create the virtuous circle that many systems have, where the K-12 system is challenging. You have to finish K-12 with an exit exam that is meaningful and content rich. And so the teaching profession, the teaching force comes out of that world. And when they go back into the classroom, they have experienced this rigor. And so they give it easily. We have discouraged that for so long that it takes a lot of administrative leadership and teacher support to deliver it. But I'm hopeful. I see good things happening.
Ashley, I want to, I know we're winding down, but I want to ask you, I want to sort of talk about the pluralism side of the equation for a moment, because that's a piece that obviously I think is really important, kind of this dual track solution that you kind of propose. Oftentimes when I've heard people refer to international education, lots of folks want to look at, say, Denmark or South Korea, et cetera. But one of the critiques of those is that those are really homogenous cultures and populations, as compared to those, say, a place like the Netherlands or Canada. What are places like Canada and the Netherlands doing on the pluralism front? Like, why has pluralism, do you think, been able to grow and thrive there, but not in the U.S.? Is there an ingredient?
That's actually a really good question. I mean, the interesting thing is, I think many of those countries do have higher immigration rates than we have now. And I actually think that pluralism is one way to address a very plural, heterogeneous society. And I mean, there are essentially two ways that democratic systems can navigate education with a very heterogeneous population. One is to say everybody has to have the same kind of schooling because we need to create, the civic republicanism, the common school. Everyone has to have the same thing. Pluralism it says, well, you may have to know the same content. The common content creates a common conversation, but you can be educated within different ethos. And so historically, our country used to be pluralistic. We used to fund Catholic schools, Protestant schools, Lutheran schools, de facto Jewish schools, non-sectarian schools. And like most democracies that were plural, that had very heterogeneous populations, the Netherlands and the United States had virtually the same level of immigration and heterogeneity at the beginning of the 19th century. The Netherlands became more and more and more pluralistic in our school systems, the United States less so. And the reason we became less so was because there was a culture war in the 19th century. I'm being very simplistic here because we're out of time, but the 19th century nativists.
Sure. Anti-Catholic. Yeah.
Anti-Catholic. And that was why we started shutting down our approach to pluralism in the school systems.
Right.
So we've now had 150 years where we just assume public education's one thing. And so it feels like, so consequently, we have these kind of zero-sum games that we play in American education policy, that it's one education is either this or that, this or that. Other countries that have been more pluralistic don't pit sectors against each other. They don't even study the Catholic school effect or are charters better than districts because they've been living with pluralism for so long. And the question is rather, how do we help all schools improve on their own terms?
Yeah, that's super interesting. Well, it speaks to, I think, some of the negative effects of having like a scarcity mindset. If we think that there are only so many students of academic ability or only so many, resources in our community, et cetera, then you tend to hold on to what you've got and be really defensive of it and maybe even hostile to another model, which I think doesn't serve our students well. Ashley, given your experience, we could do this for hours. And while I would love to, I don't know if our internet would hold up that long. So I just want to thank you for joining us today. Really, congratulations again on the new book, which I do have here, and we'll drop a link into Education, Pluralism, and Democracy. It's a great read. You are sure, audience, you're sure to learn something, if not many things, from this book. But really want to just thank you, Ashley, for joining us on this edition of Quality Matters.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see both of you.